Welcome to this overview of the Quality Practices component of the 2019-2020 Sponsor Evaluation. This tutorial will discuss the standards included in the quality review, highlighting the changes that have been made from the 2018-2019 Quality Rubric to the 2019-2020 Quality Rubric. Please note that not every change to the rubric is included in this tutorial. To see all of the changes made to the rubric, please review the 2019-2020 Quality Practices Rubric changelog. The sponsor evaluation became a part of state law during 2011-2012 as part of House Bill 555. The purpose of the sponsor evaluation system is to assist the department in its oversight of sponsors, improve the quality of sponsor practices, and improve community school operations and academic performance. The sponsor performance evaluations are made up of three equally weighted components: student academic performance of the sponsor's community schools, the sponsor's compliance with laws and rules, and the sponsor's adherence to quality practices. Once each of these three components has been evaluated, rated, and scored, those scores are then combined to determine the sponsor's overall evaluation rating. The points received for academic performance, plus the points received for compliance, plus the points received for quality practices, equals the overall sponsor evaluation rating. As mentioned, this tutorial focuses on the quality practices component of the sponsor evaluation. The requirement for the department to evaluate a sponsor's adherence to quality practices is included in Section 3314.016B3 of the Ohio Revised Code, which states that the department, in consultation with entities that sponsor community schools, shall prescribe quality practices for community school sponsors and develop an instrument to measure adherence to those quality practices. The quality practices shall be based on standards developed by the National Association of Charter School Authorizers or any other nationally organized community school organization. The quality practices component evaluates sponsors on 6 critical areas: A, commitment and capacity; B, application process and decision-making; C, performance contracting; D, oversight and evaluation; E, termination and renewal decision-making; and F, technical assistance. The first 5 critical areas are based on the principles and standards of the National Association of Charter School Authorizers. The 6th critical area, technical assistance, is based on the provisions of Section 3314.023 of the Ohio Revised Code, which requires sponsors to provide monitoring, oversight, and technical assistance to each school they sponsor. Let's consider the first of the 6 critical areas, Critical Area A, commitment and capacity. This critical area evaluates sponsorship capacity, the sponsor's internal processes for improvement, the sponsor's resources, which includes both human and financial resources, and the extent to which the sponsor has communicated its roles and responsibilities and how they are delineated from those of its schools. Commitment and capacity is made up of 7 standards: A1, mission and strategic plan; A2, goals and self-evaluation; A3, roles and responsibilities; A4, conflicts of interest; A5, staff expertise; A6, staff development; and A7, allocation of resources. In regard to changes made to the 2019-2020 Quality Rubric, for Standard A1, Mission and Strategic Plan, language on the 3-point requirements has changed from Strategic Plan was in operation for the majority of the review year to Strategic Plan was in operation by January 1st. For Standard A2, Goals and Self-Evaluation, language on the 3-point requirements has changed from the sponsor submitted evidence that for a majority of the review year it develops and implements action steps based on the findings from its improvement process to the sponsor submitted evidence that prior to January 1st of the review year it develops and implements action steps based on the findings from its improvement process. For Standard A4, Conflicts of Interest, the 3-point requirements of the quality rubric now includes the language specifying that the sponsor must submit evidence of a signed conflict of interest statement for any staff with sponsoring responsibilities who was hired after September 30th. The evidence must show that the statement was signed within 14 calendar days of the person's position start date. For Standard A6 Staff Development, the 2-point requirements was changed for the 2019-2020 Quality Rubric to require sponsors to submit evidence that a majority of the sponsoring staff participated in at least one professional development session prior to January 1st of the review year. Let's now focus on the second of the 6 critical areas, Critical Area B, Application Process and Decision Making. This critical area evaluates the sponsor's application process, whether there are rigorous criteria for all types of applications, application reviewers and their training, and application decision making. Application process and decision making is made up of 6 standards. B1, Application Process, Timeline, and Directions. B2, Rigorous Criteria for New Schools. B3, Rigorous Criteria for Replicators in Schools Seeking a Change in Sponsor. B4, Reviewer Expertise. B5, Reviewer Protocols. And B6, Rigorous Decision Making. On Standard B4, Reviewer Expertise, the second key indicator was revised, changing from resumes and/or bios demonstrate that at least one application reviewer has several years of community school and/or sponsoring experience to resumes and/or bios demonstrate that at least 2 application reviewers have several years of sponsoring experience. This helps to better align the key indicator with the 4-point requirements of the standard. Regarding Standard B5, Reviewer Protocols, some changes were made to the 2-point and 3-point requirements. On the 2-point requirements, the language on the second half of the requirement was changed from, there is some evidence that reviewers receive training on the protocols, to, there is evidence that all reviewers receive training on the protocols. On the 3-point requirements of Standard B5, reference to new reviewers receiving training on the protocols and rubric was removed because it is now included on the 2-point requirements, which require sponsors to provide evidence of all reviewers receiving training. For B6, Rigorous Decision Making, the second key indicator was changed from, the sponsor approves only those applicants that earn at least 75% of possible points, to, the sponsor enters into preliminary agreements with only those applicants that earn at least 75% of possible points. The third critical area is C, Performance Contracting. This critical area evaluates the contract performance measures that the sponsor requires of the school, contract terms for renewal and non-renewal, and contract terms and processes for amendment and modification of the contract agreement. Performance contracting is made up of 3 standards, which are C1, Contract Performance Measures, C2, Contract Terms for Renewal and Non-Renewal, and C3, Contract Amendment and Updates. In regard to changes to the 2019-2020 Quality Rubric, on Standard C1, Contract Performance Measures, the key indicators were revised, with the language being changed from contracts include to contracts contain a performance framework that includes. For example, the first key indicator changed from contracts include all applicable measures and indicators of student performance included on the state report card with specific annual metrics and targets for each measure to contracts contain a performance framework that includes all applicable measures and indicators of student performance included on the state report card with specific annual metrics and targets for each measure. The same language changes are also seen on the other 4 indicators of this standard. The same change was done for the 1-point, 2-point, 3-point, and 4-point requirements of this standard, with references to contracts include being changed to contracts have a performance framework that includes. Standard C2, Contract Terms for Renewal and Non-Renewal, saw changes to the 1-point requirements, with the second paragraph being removed. For Standard C3, Contract Amendments and Updates, the first paragraph of the 4-point requirements was revised. However, the requirements to receive 4 points remain the same. We are now on the 4th of the 6 critical areas, Critical Area D, Oversight and Evaluation. This critical area examines the sponsor's system of oversight, including financial, enrollment, and on-site reviews, the process the sponsor uses for monitoring schools' academic performance, the sponsor's intervention guidance and action, and the sponsor's yearly reports on its school's performance. Oversight and evaluation is made up of 7 standards. D1, oversight transparency. D2, enrollment and financial reviews. D3, on-site visits. D4, site visit reports. D5, performance monitoring. D6, intervention. And D7, annual performance reports. Some changes were made to Standard D3, on-site visits. The standard statement was revised, changing from sponsors conducting at least 2 on-site reviews that are 3 months apart to sponsors conducting at least 1 on-site review at some point during the first half of the review year and the other review at some point during the second half of the review year. The same revision was made to the failure statement for Standard D3, with sponsors being required to submit at least 2 on-site reviews for each selected school, with 1 review taking place during the first half of the review year and the other review taking place during the second half of the review year. Changes were also made to the 1-point and 2-point requirements of D3. Under the 1-point requirements, the 2018-2019 rubric added at least 3 months apart as part of the requirement for the on-site reviews. However, the 2019-2020 rubric removes that requirement and requires 1 on-site review to take place during the first half of the review year and the other review to take place during the second half of the review year. The requirement of collecting data from a school employee on the day of the review was removed from the 1-point requirements and is now under the 2-point requirements. For sponsors to receive 2 points on Standard D3, they not only have to meet the 1-point requirements and submit evidence of an on-site visit protocol, but show evidence that across at least 2 on-site reviews while school is in session, one during the first half of the review year, the other during the second half of the review year, that they reviewed the school's compliance with all applicable laws, rules, contractual obligations, and academic performance measures. The 2-point requirements also now require sponsors to collect data from a school employee on the day of the review. Standard D4, site visit reports, goes hand in hand with Standard D3, on-site visits, as it is a quality sponsoring practice for sponsors to provide their schools with a report after each on-site review. The standard statement for Standard D4 was revised, specifying that the reports are to be provided to the schools after each site visit, one of which should take place during the first half of the review year, and one taking place during the second half of the review year. The failure statement for Standard D4 was also revised. It now specifies that sponsors must submit evidence of providing each of their selected schools with a report following an on-site review. The report is not the monthly financial and enrollment review reports that sponsors are required to do. It goes beyond those monthly reviews. The 1-point requirements of Standard D4 were changed to specify that sponsors that submit evidence of providing each of their selected schools with a report following an on-site review while school is in session will receive 1 point. Unlike the 2018-2019 quality rubric, the 2019-2020 quality rubric does not require the report to focus on the school's compliance with all applicable laws, rules, contractual obligations, and academic performance measures to receive 1 point on D4. The report, however, cannot be a monthly financial or enrollment report. The 2-point requirements were revised to specify that a report must be provided to each selected school after at least 2 on-site reviews while school is in session, with 1 review taking place during the first half of the review year and the second review taking place during the second half of the review year that together cover the school's compliance with all applicable laws, rules, contractual obligations, and academic performance measures. A revision was also made to Standard D5, performance monitoring. On the 1-point requirements, the first paragraph was rearranged while the second paragraph was removed. To get 1 point, sponsors must submit evidence of collecting data related to all applicable contractual, academic, financial, and organizational/operational measures for the majority of its selected schools for at least 1 school year. D6 also saw some parts of the 1-point requirements being removed on the 2019-2020 quality rubric. To receive 1 point, the sponsor's review contracts must state its responsibility to intervene as required by Ohio Revised Code 3314.023E. Let's now consider the fifth critical area E, termination and renewal decision-making. Termination and renewal decision-making evaluates the sponsor's renewal application process, renewal and non-renewal decisions and notification, contract termination, school closure, and renewal application reviewer protocols. Termination and renewal decision-making is made up of 6 standards: E1, renewal application; E2, renewal and non-renewal decisions; E3, non-renewal notification; E4, contract termination; E5, closure process; and E6, renewal application reviewer protocols. In regard to standard E2, renewal and non-renewal decisions, there are some changes to the 1-point, 2-point, and 4-point requirements of the 2019-2020 quality rubric. To receive 1 point, sponsors must submit board minutes as evidence of the renewal decision-making process. To receive 2 points, sponsors must meet the 1-point requirements and submit evidence of requiring all schools that were up for renewal to submit a renewal application. The rest of the 2-point requirements were moved to other point requirements of the standard. For the 4-point requirements of E2, the language was changed, with sponsors now required to not only submit evidence of granting renewal only to schools earning at least 75% of possible points on the renewal rubric, but also that they submit evidence of granting renewal only to schools that met the academic targets in their contract, had no unresolved compliance issues with any applicable laws or contract terms, and remedied any documented issues of fiscal or operational viability. If sponsors granted renewal to schools earning at least 75% of possible points on the renewal rubric, but the schools did not meet all contractual academic targets, contract terms, compliance requirements, or documented issues of fiscal or operational viability, then they must submit evidence regarding why such schools were granted renewal and how the decision to renew aligns with the sponsor's renewal evaluation process and national sponsoring standards. For the 1-point and 2-point requirements of E3, non-renewal notification, the date by which a sponsor must ensure that the school's families were notified of an upheld non-renewal decision changed from May 30th to May 15th to align with the document submission deadline. On standard E4, contract termination, the 1-point requirements were changed, requiring sponsors reviewed contracts to have the statutory language for the grounds for termination, as well as a separate written termination policy apart from the contract language. The 2-point requirements of standard E4 were changed by requiring the 1-point requirements to be met in addition to the other requirements that were already included. Standard E4 also had a new note added to it. In addition to providing any needed documentation regarding contracts that were terminated during the 2019-2020 school year, sponsors must also provide applicable documentation for a sample of schools selected as part of the quality review. Standard E5 closure process also had a new note added, which requires sponsors to provide evidence both for selected schools as well as for any schools that closed during the 2018-2019 and the 2019-2020 review years. The sixth and final critical area is critical area F, technical assistance. This critical area was developed based on provisions of the Ohio Revised Code, which requires sponsors to provide technical assistance, among other things, to their sponsored schools. It evaluates the legal provision of sponsors being required to provide technical assistance to their schools, legal updates, professional development for schools, and sponsors' relationships with their schools' governing authorities. Technical assistance is made up of 4 standards: F1, ongoing technical assistance; F2, legal and policy updates; F3, professional development for schools; and F4, relationships with schools' governing authorities. For standard F1, ongoing technical assistance, The 1-point requirements were changed from the sponsor submitted evidence that it provides reactive technical assistance to its schools when made aware of issues, problems, or concerns, to the sponsor submitted evidence it provides technical assistance to its schools. A minor change was made to Standard F3, Professional Development for Schools. On the 1-point requirements, the phrase once or twice per year was changed to at least once per year. Other minor changes such as this, where words are changed, rearranged, or removed, but the actual requirements of the rubric have not changed, are seen throughout the rubric. To see examples of what type of documents are acceptable for each standard, sponsors can refer to the document titled Quality Practices Component Upload Guidance. This document provides examples of both relevant and unacceptable documents. Please note that the document serves as a guide but is not an exhaustive list of all acceptable or relevant documents. In addition, submitting the document types listed on the guidance does not guarantee that the sponsor will receive a specific rating on any standard. Sponsors can also refer to the document titled Quality Practices Rubric Changelog to see the specific changes made to each standard on the rubric for the 2019-2020 Quality Review. Now we will go over standards that may be non-applicable for some sponsors. Some of the standards on the Quality Practices rubric may be entirely or partially not applicable to some sponsors, depending on their specific circumstances. If the entire standard is not applicable to the sponsor, then the standard is not included in the scoring at all. If a portion of the standard is not applicable, then the sponsor would be evaluated only on the part of the standard that is applicable. If an entire standard or a portion of a standard is not applicable to a sponsor, the sponsor must upload a memo explaining why. If a sponsor believes that a standard or a portion of a standard is not applicable but does not upload a memo, the sponsor will be rated on the entire standard. So which standards may be not applicable to a sponsor? B4, Reviewer Expertise. B6, Rigorous Decision Making. E2, Renewal and Non-Renewal Decisions. And E3, Non-Renewal Notification, are the standards for which the entire standard may be non-applicable to a sponsor. The sponsor will not get scored on these standards if it is determined that they are not applicable. Standards B5, Reviewer Protocols, E4, Contract Termination, E5, Closure Process, and E6, Renewal Application Reviewer Protocols, are the standards for which a portion of the standard may be non-applicable to a sponsor. In this situation, the sponsor will still get scored on the applicable part of the standard. Now we will go over the selected subset of schools. This doesn't really pertain to sponsors who only have one school. It's primarily for those sponsors who have multiple schools. As was the case for the previous sponsor evaluation cycles, the 2019-2020 evaluation will rely on a subset of each sponsor's schools for document submission on specific standards. Sponsors will see this primarily on the standards included under sections D, E, and F of the quality rubric. The subset of schools are randomly selected by the evaluator. In addition, the subset of selected schools will include at least one of each type of school in the sponsor's portfolio. The subset of schools selected for the Quality Practices Review is not necessarily the same subset of schools selected for the on-site visits that are part of the Compliance Review. There is a randomly selected sample of schools for the Quality Review and a randomly selected sample of schools for the on-site compliance visits. If a quality standard specifies that a subset of schools is included, then the sponsor needs to submit evidence for its selected subset of schools. If a standard requires that documentation for a subset of schools be uploaded, then sponsors will see this note on the standard. Once the list of the subset of schools has been developed for the 2019-2020 evaluation cycle, that information will be available in both Epicenter and on the department's website. Now we will go over narratives and interviews. For each of the 33 standards, the sponsor has the option of submitting a narrative explanation of how the submitted documents support the sponsor's practice as it pertains to the standard. Evaluators may use narrative explanations in the scoring process if they are substantiated by documentary evidence. Please note that for standards C1 and C2, which do not require any documents to be uploaded, sponsors will have the option to enter a narrative into the narrative field of each of those two standards in Epicenter. Sponsors are not required to submit a narrative. However, sponsors choosing to submit a narrative must use the department's narrative form. The narrative form is a 2-page, single-sided document. Narratives are not considered as evidence of the standard. They must substantiate the documents that the sponsor uploads into Epicenter for a specific standard. If a narrative explanation is not confirmed by the sponsor's submitted documents, then the explanation will not have an impact on scoring. For the 2019-2020 evaluation cycle, sponsors still have the option of having an interview with the evaluator as part of the quality review. The interview functions similarly to the narrative explanation in that it provides an opportunity for sponsors to explain the documentation that has been uploaded into Epicenter for a particular standard. No additional documents will be collected during or after the interview. To request an interview, sponsors must complete the interview intent form and upload it into Epicenter by the specified deadline to indicate whether or not they want to participate in an interview. At some point after submission deadline for the interview intent form, the evaluators will contact the sponsors to set up an interview. Again, the interview is optional. After the evaluators determine a score for each of the 33 standards, the department then calculates the overall quality score and rating. We will briefly go over how that rating is calculated. For each of the 33 quality standards, sponsors receive a score between 0 and 4 points, or an NA if the standard is determined to be non-applicable. The quality rating is calculated using the formula of B divided by A, where A equals the number of possible points for standards that are applicable to the sponsor being reviewed, and B equals the total points scored in the standards included in A. The scores for each standard of the quality rubric are combined to determine the overall percentage and rating. So, for example, if a sponsor receives 116 points out of a possible 132 points, then the sponsor's overall percentage would be 116 divided by 132, which equals 87.9%. As the scoring scale for quality shows, a percentage of 87.9% falls in the range of the rating of meet standards. Therefore, the sponsor would receive 3 points for the quality practices component. Now we will go over document submission for the quality review. Like the previous evaluation cycles, documentation for the 2019-2020 evaluation cycle will be submitted to the department through Epicenter. Each quality practice item for which documentation is required will be specified by submission type in Epicenter and will show up on each sponsor's task queue. Make sure that you upload the correct document with the correct submission type. In addition, if the same document is needed for multiple standards, please make sure that you upload that document to each standard for which it serves as evidence. A submission type is the title given to a request for documentation within the department's online platform, Epicenter. If a sponsor has a document that exceeds 25 pages in length, then the sponsor should use the memo template provided by the department. On the memo template, the sponsor would list the specific page numbers within the document that should be reviewed for the standard in question. Please use the memo template provided by the department. Once the sponsor has completed the template, the sponsor will upload the template into Epicenter using the submission type for the standard in question. Sponsors can replace any documents that they upload to a standard up until the document submission window closes. However, once the submission window closes, that's it. No documents can be added, removed, or replaced. The document submission window for the quality component items will be from sometime in December 2019 to May 15, 2020. Sponsors will be informed of the specific date in December once that information is available. The quality component items will be included in each sponsor's task queue in Epicenter 90 days before the submission deadline. However, if a sponsor wants to upload documents prior to that time, the sponsor can access the submission types through the Compliance Center in Epicenter if the compliance requirement has been scheduled. As mentioned, sometime during December 2019, Epicenter will be open for the 2019-2020 sponsor evaluation cycle. The document submission window for the quality review closes at the end of the day on May 15, 2020. Then, during the summer of 2020, sponsors will have the opportunity to participate in an interview with the reviewers. The interview is optional and serves as a means of providing further explanation for documents that the sponsor had already submitted by May 15th. Sometime during September of 2020, the department will make the 2019-2020 preliminary results of the compliance and quality components available to sponsors. Sponsors will then have 10 business days from the posting of those results to submit an adjustment request form to the department for any compliance or quality items for which they feel they were incorrectly scored. The department will then review the adjustment requests and make adjustments if they are warranted. The department will make the results of the adjustment reviews available to sponsors prior to the posting of the final evaluation ratings. The final sponsor evaluation ratings are statutorily required to be posted by November 15th each year, so the final ratings for the 2019-2020 sponsor evaluations will be posted by November 15th, 2020. This concludes the overview of the quality practices component of the 2019-2020 sponsor evaluation. Please contact the sponsor evaluation team if you have any additional questions. If you have specific questions about the sponsor evaluation, please send them to sponsor.evaluation@education.ohio.gov.